Hello, students, teachers, parents, history nerds. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Nutshelled History, where we lay out the facts, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Today, we are going to start our United States history series by looking at America's cultural roots. Don't forget that there's a link for a fill-in-the-blank worksheet in the description. I just ask that you like and subscribe. I apologize for any mispronunciations ahead of time. I do my best. Okay, let's go. Once upon a frosty time, scholars thought Paleo-Indians first strolled into the Americas 15,000 years ago during the Ice Age, using a nifty land bridge from Siberia to Alaska like a prehistoric shortcut. But now, some brainy folks think these early explorers might have arrived 40,000 years ago. Talk about an early bird special. Fast forward to about 12,000 years ago, the climate turned up the heat, making life a buffet of biodiversity. People started farming, villages popped up, and in Mexico, those villages grew into bustling cities with bigwig chiefs. The Olmecs and Mayas were the cool cats along the Gulf and Caribbean, while the Aztecs ruled the highlands of central Mexico. Over in the southwest, the Hohokam and Anasazi were busy building with adobe bricks. In the Mississippi River Valley, folks enjoyed a humid and comfy climate, built big towns, and traded like there was no tomorrow. Some adventurous Mississippians headed west to the Great Plains, where they set up villages, planted crops, and chased bison. But watch out! They sometimes had run-ins with nomads from the Rocky Mountains. Down south, the Choctaws, Creeks, and others were farming, hunting, and fishing. In the northeast, two major language groups emerged, the Algonquians and the Iroquoians. 5 Iroquois tribes even formed a league to keep the peace, a sort of ancient United Nations. Despite their many differences, American Indian groups shared some common beliefs. They saw spirits in everything, didn't fuss much about private property, and treated each other with a respectful equality. Some of America's cultural roots also come from West Africa. West Africa, where salt and gold were the ancient equivalent of Bitcoin. Back in the day, these resources sparked bustling trade and led to the rise of mighty empires with vibrant cultures. First up, the Kingdom of Ghana, not the one you're thinking of, made waves from the Atlantic to the Niger River around AD 800. By the 11th century, they were the go-to gold supplier for the Mediterranean bling scene. But then, pesky invaders crashed the party, and Ghana gave way to Mali around AD 1200. Enter Mansa Musa in the early 1300s, the king who took Mali to new heights, expanded westward, and gave Islam a VIP pass. However, by the 1400s, Mali got overshadowed by the new kid on the block, Songhai. In West Africa, land ownership was a family affair, literally. Instead of owning land, wealth was measured in slaves and wives. Talk about unusual investments. Slavery was woven into the economy, but it wasn't about racial inferiority. Slaves were traded like gold and salt, but they could marry and their kids were free. Then came the Portuguese explorers, who realized trading with West Africans was a gold mine. With the blessing of West African kings, they cranked up the slave trade. By 1500, Europeans were buying about 1,800 African slaves annually, mostly for plantations on the Madeira, Canary, and Azore Islands. This kicked off centuries of brutal exploitation of West African slaves by Europeans, setting the stage for an ugly chapter in history. In the 1400s, Europe was going through a midlife crisis. The Middle Ages, with its low-key trade, lack of strong nations, and general stay-at-home vibe, was ending. The Renaissance came along like a fancy new sports car, sparking interest in learning, the arts, and exotic travel. Europe was a patchwork of warring kingdoms, each ruled by a monarch who let the elite run the show. These elites, who were less than 5% of the population, hogged all the land and wealth. Meanwhile, most Europeans were working poor, and many were straight-up beggars. Europeans were feeling cramped by their wealthy and powerful Muslim neighbors, who dominated trade routes and had won a series of religious wars. Inspired by explorers like Marco Polo, Europeans started dreaming of finding a new trade route to the riches of India and China. Hope for expansion came from the Iberian Peninsula. The 1469 marriage of Prince Ferdinand and Queen Isabella united Aragon and Castile into Spain, and they completed the Reconquista by seizing Granada from the Muslims. With their prime location, Spain and Portugal were ready to lead Europe's maritime adventures. Portugal took the lead in 1419 with Prince Henry the Navigator, who sponsored explorations down the West African coast. Portuguese mariner Bartolomeu Dias figured out how to sail around Africa's southern tip in 1487, and Vasco da Gama reached India in 1498, opening a profitable trade route. Italian mariner Christopher Columbus chased Spain's dream of westward exploration and landed in the Bahamas, thinking he'd reached Asia. He claimed the land for Spain despite the locals already being there. Meanwhile, John Cabot sailed to Newfoundland in 1497, and Pedro Alvarez Cabral discovered Brazil in 1500. Amerigo Vespucci realized South America was a new continent in 1501, and Ferdinand Magellan's expedition circumnavigated the globe between 1519 and 1522. In 1519, Hernán Cortés conquered the Aztec Empire in Mexico, and the Spanish built Mexico City on its ruins. The Spanish expanded their empire into the Americas, driven by faith, loyalty, and the lure of wealth. Unfortunately, European diseases like smallpox wiped out native populations, leading colonists to turn to African slaves for labor. The Columbian Exchange brought new plants and animals to the Americas, transforming the environment. Europeans began farming American crops like maize and potatoes, which boosted their population while native populations plummeted. And thus, the age of exploration was off to a chaotic, disease-ridden, and profitable start. Spain hit the jackpot with their American conquests and decided to flex their new wealth with a big, aggressive military policy in Europe. This made the Dutch, French, and English jealous, and they scrambled to get their own piece of the American pie. Throw in the Protestant Reformation, and you've got religious squabbles heating things up even more. The conquistadors were pros at conquering, but flunked at colony management. Catholic missionaries swooped in to convert the Indians to Christianity and mold them into Spanish mini-me's. They had the Spanish soldiers set up forts, or presidios, near their missions for backup. Spain's empire in America was split into New Spain and Peru, each ruled by a king-appointed viceroy. Most colonists were men who married Indian women, and their kids, called mestizos, became the largest group in Spain's colonies by the 18th century. Enslaved Africans were also a significant part of the population, especially in the Caribbean. Hernando de Soto and Francisco Vázquez de Coronado explored north of Mexico, leaving behind diseases and shattered dreams of golden kingdoms. After their expeditions flopped, Spain lost interest in the northern lands, but friars kept trying to convert the Indians, often harshly. The Pueblo Indians eventually revolted in 1680 under a shaman named Pope, causing major havoc before Spain reclaimed New Mexico and decided to play nice-ish. Meanwhile, the French were busy hunting for a northwest passage to Asia in the early 1500s. They explored the eastern coast of North America and claimed the area around the St. Lawrence River as New France. French mariners fished and traded beaver fur with the Indians, stirring up conflicts among native groups and rival traders. To fend off competition, the French built Quebec in 1608, with Samuel de Champlain making deals with local tribes and helping them against their Iroquois foes. New France grew slowly, governed like New Spain with a military governor, a civil administrator, and a Catholic bishop. French priests worked to convert the Indians, while fur traders, or coureurs de bois, often married Indian women, creating a mixed population known as the Métis. By the late 1600s, the French expanded into the lower Mississippi Valley, founding Louisiana in honor of King Louis XIV. They established New Orleans in 1718, making it the colony's biggest town and main seaport, and used Louisiana as a military base to keep the English at bay. So between conquistadors with grand but messy plans, friars with harsh conversion tactics, and French fur traders with a knack for marriage diplomacy, the 1400s and 1500s were a whirlwind of exploration, conquest, and cultural mashups. There you have it, folks. That is America's cultural roots nutshelled. Thanks for stopping by Nutshelled History. Don't forget to go nuts on those like and subscribe button. It really helps me out. See y'all soon.